They ridiculed him for his skin color, mocked his every step, and believed he'd never rise above their hatred. But when a young black student took the stage, his performance not only silenced the racist crowd, but also proved that brilliance knows no boundaries. What happened next left everyone speechless. The campus of Oak Ridge University was buzzing with activity. It was a crisp autumn morning, and students were scattered across the sprawling lawns, laughing, chatting, and rushing to classes. Among them was Elijah Harris, a quiet and diligent young black man. With his worn backpack slung over one shoulder, he walked confidently toward the student auditorium. His head was high, but his journey at the university had been anything but smooth. Elijah had transferred to Oak Ridge on a scholarship, a rare opportunity for someone from his modest neighborhood. But his arrival was met with more skepticism than celebration. He often heard the whispers as he passed, felt the judgmental glances, and endured the occasional mockery from a group of privileged students who seemed to have made it their mission to belittle him. They called him names, laughed at his clothes, and even questioned why someone like him had been given a spot at their prestigious school. Among the worst offenders was Jason Miller, a wealthy and arrogant senior known for his sharp tongue and biting humor. Jason led a group of similarly entitled students who spent their free time ridiculing those they deemed lesser. Elijah quickly became one of their favorite targets. One particular day, the group's taunts escalated. Jason and his friends sat on the steps of the library, their laughter cutting through the crisp morning air as Elijah walked past. "Hey, Elijah," Jason called out, a smirk spreading across his face. "When are you gonna quit pretending you belong here? Maybe you should stick to things you're good at, like disappearing." Laughter erupted from the group, and Elijah paused for a brief moment. He turned his head slightly, meeting Jason's gaze with calm determination, then continued walking. His silence spoke volumes, but it only fueled their taunts. "Elijah, the silent type," another student jeered. "Maybe he's just too scared to speak." Their laughter followed him all the way to the lecture hall, but Elijah didn't let it deter him. Inside, he clenched his fists, reminding himself of the promise he'd made to his mother. To rise above the noise, to prove to himself and others that he was capable of greatness. What the others didn't know was that Elijah had a talent, one that would soon shock everyone at Oak Ridge University. He had spent months preparing for the university's annual talent showcase, an event that brought together students from all backgrounds to display their skills. Elijah had signed up, determined to show the world what he was made of. But as the days grew closer, so did the pressure. Jason and his friends caught wind of Elijah's participation and wasted no time mocking the idea. Rumors began spreading across campus. "What's he gonna do?" they sneered. "Juggle textbooks? Tell us stories from his life in the slums?" Elijah heard every word, but he kept his focus. He practiced late at night in an empty auditorium, pouring his heart and soul into his performance. This wasn't just about proving the bullies wrong. It was about proving to himself that he could shine, even in the darkest of times. And as the night of the talent showcase approached, Elijah knew one thing for certain. This was his chance to turn the tables. The night of the talent showcase arrived, and the auditorium was packed with students, faculty, and parents. The atmosphere was electric, with bright stage lights illuminating the room and a low hum of excitement filling the air. Performers nervously paced backstage, adjusting their outfits and rehearsing their acts under their breath. Elijah stood in a quiet corner, gripping a small notepad and taking deep breaths. He wasn't nervous about his performance itself. He had prepared for weeks. But the weight of the crowd's judgment, especially from Jason and his group, loomed large. He had overheard their sneering comments earlier that day. "Can't wait to see this," Jason had said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "He's probably going to embarrass himself in front of everyone. We'll finally get some real entertainment." Elijah shook off the memory. He focused on the words scribbled in his notepad, his own reminders to stay grounded, to perform for himself, and no one else. He closed his eyes, recalling his mother's voice from years ago. Never let them take your power, Elijah. You've got something they can't take away. On stage, the performances had begun. A guitarist strummed a soulful tune, followed by a magician whose tricks drew polite applause. The crowd cheered louder for a cheerleading squad and a singer with a powerful voice. Jason and his crew sat in the middle of the audience, leaning back in their chairs, smirking and whispering jokes to one another. Elijah noticed them briefly as he peeked through the curtain, but quickly turned his attention back to his breathing. Finally, Elijah's name was announced. "And now please welcome Elijah Harris to the stage." The room went quiet as Elijah stepped into the spotlight. For a moment, the sheer brightness of the lights and the sea of faces staring back at him was overwhelming. He took another deep breath, centered himself, and walked confidently to the microphone. From the audience, Jason let out a low chuckle, leaning over to whisper, "This should be good," loud enough for those around him to hear. A few students snickered, but the room largely remained silent, curious about what Elijah would do. Elijah scanned the crowd, letting the silence linger for a moment. He wasn't here to prove anything to Jason or his friends. He was here to share his truth. And then he began. Elijah's voice started soft but steady, delivering a spoken-word piece he had written himself. The rhythm of his words carried power, each sentence a testament to his struggles, his resilience, and his dreams. He spoke of growing up in a community often overlooked, of fighting for opportunities in a world that doubted him, and of standing tall in the face of ridicule. The audience, initially unsure of how to react, quickly fell into a hushed silence. Elijah's words were raw and poignant, cutting through the room like a blade. Even those who had been skeptical found themselves leaning forward, captivated by the depth of his story. Jason's smirk began to fade as Elijah's performance gained momentum. The cadence of Elijah's voice grew stronger, his delivery more impassioned. He painted vivid images with his words, taking the audience on a journey through his life, the pain, the triumphs, and the unyielding determination to rise above it all. By the time Elijah finished, the room was utterly still. The silence was not one of judgment, but of awe. And then the applause began. As the thunderous applause filled the auditorium, Elijah took a step back from the microphone, his chest rising and falling with the intensity of his performance. For a moment, he was unsure how to process the overwhelming response. Faces in the crowd blurred as the sound of clapping hands reverberated off the walls. The standing ovation began slowly, starting with a few students in the front row. Then more rose, and within seconds, the entire room was on its feet, cheering and clapping. Elijah could see his professor, Dr. Caldwell, standing near the back, clapping with a proud smile. Even the principal, who had been seated stoically in the middle, was now nodding in approval, his hands joining in the applause. Jason and his group, however, remained seated. Their earlier smugness was gone, replaced by expressions of disbelief. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his friends glancing around awkwardly, as if unsure whether to clap or continue their silent protest. Elijah bowed slightly, his confidence growing as he acknowledged the audience's reaction. He felt a surge of validation, not from proving Jason wrong, but from connecting with everyone else in the room. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt seen and heard. Backstage, as Elijah stepped down from the stage, fellow performers approached him with wide smiles and enthusiastic pats on the back. "That was amazing," one girl exclaimed. "I've never heard anything like that before." "Dude, you killed it out there," another student added, his voice filled with admiration. Elijah offered them a humble smile. "Thank you," he said softly, his heart still pounding from the performance. Meanwhile, Jason's crew whispered among themselves. "How did he even come up with that?" one of them muttered. Jason's face was a mix of frustration and begrudging respect. "Whatever," he said, brushing it off. but the doubt in his voice was evident. The moment wasn't lost on Dr. Caldwell, who approached Elijah with a proud expression. "Elijah, I knew you had something special, but tonight, you showed them all what you're capable of. Never forget this moment." Elijah nodded, his voice steady but emotional. "Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. It means a lot." As the event continued, Elijah found himself surrounded by students who wanted to talk to him, to share how much his performance had resonated. For some, his words had mirrored their own struggles. For others, it was an eye-opening experience that left them questioning their preconceived notions. By the end of the night, Elijah felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the applause or the recognition. It was about the impact his words had left behind, a ripple effect he hoped would continue long after the applause had faded. The next morning, the university was buzzing with chatter about Elijah's performance. It was all anyone could talk about, how he had turned the tables on the mocking, how his talent had silenced the naysayers, and how his words had resonated deeply with everyone in the room. Social media was ablaze. Clips of his spoken word performance had gone viral, shared not only by his classmates, but by people far beyond the campus. Comments flooded in, praising his bravery and talent. "Wow, this gave me chills. What an incredible young man. He turned hate into something beautiful, so inspiring. Jason and his friends should be ashamed. Elijah's the real MVP." Meanwhile, Elijah's inbox was filling with messages, some from students he'd never spoken to before, others from alumni who had heard about his performance. Some even came from organizations and community leaders who wanted him to perform at their events. But amidst the praise, there were quieter, more personal moments of validation. One came from a fellow black student, Marcus, who approached Elijah outside the library later that day. "Man, I just wanted to say thank you," Marcus said, his voice filled with emotion. "What you did last night, it gave me courage. I've been holding back, letting people's opinions get to me. But seeing you stand up like that, it changed something for me." Elijah nodded, his own voice catching. "We're stronger than we think, Marcus. Sometimes we just have to remind them, and ourselves." Not everyone was as willing to acknowledge the impact of Elijah's performance, though. Jason and his friends avoided him, their usual confidence replaced with uneasy glances whenever they passed him on campus. But Elijah didn't care about their opinions anymore. He had proven his worth, not just to them, but to himself. That afternoon, Elijah received a message from the university administration. At first, he felt a flicker of anxiety, unsure of what it could be about. But when he opened the email, his breath caught. "Dear Mr. Johnson, we would like to formally recognize your outstanding performance at last night's event. Your bravery, talent, and eloquence have made a lasting impression on the university community. We would be honored to feature your story in our upcoming alumni newsletter and invite you to speak at our annual Diversity and Inclusion Seminar. Warm regards, Dr. Elaine Carter, Director of Student Engagement." Elijah couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just about recognition. This was a step toward meaningful change, toward creating a campus environment where no one else would have to endure what he had. The stage had been his moment of triumph, but the days that followed proved that Elijah's impact extended far beyond the applause. His voice had sparked conversations, opened eyes, and planted seeds of change. The days turned into weeks, and the ripple effect of Elijah's performance continued to spread. It wasn't just the university buzzing with change. It was Elijah himself who began to see the power of his voice and the importance of his courage. At the university's annual diversity seminar, Elijah stood once again on a stage, this time as a keynote speaker. The room was filled to capacity, students and faculty alike eager to hear from the young man who had turned humiliation into a moment of inspiration. As Elijah stepped to the podium, the room quieted. This time, there were no mocking laughs, No dismissive stares, just anticipation and respect. "Good evening," Elijah began, his voice steady and filled with purpose. "A few weeks ago I stood on a very different stage, facing a very different crowd. That night, I wasn't just performing, I was fighting. Fighting to prove that I belonged, that my voice mattered, and that no one's worth is defined by someone else's prejudice." The audience listened intently as he recounted his journey, not just the performance, but the pain, resilience, and determination it took to get there. "But this isn't just my story," Elijah continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. "It's the story of anyone who's ever been told they don't belong. It's for anyone who's been laughed at, underestimated, or judged by the color of their skin, their background, or their dreams. It's a story of pushing through the noise and daring to show the world who you really are." Applause erupted, and Elijah paused, letting the moment sink in before delivering his final words. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Our strength isn't in proving the haters wrong, it's in staying true to ourselves. Because when we do that, we don't just survive, we thrive. And we inspire others to do the same." The crowd rose to their feet, the sound of applause echoing through the hall. Among the audience, even the faculty who had remained silent in the face of past injustices were visibly moved. Change, Elijah realized, starts with a single spark, and he had become that spark. Months later, Elijah's story had become a cornerstone of the university's push for inclusivity. The administration took action, implementing new policies and workshops to foster a more supportive campus environment. Racist incidents were addressed swiftly and publicly, signaling a shift in the culture. But for Elijah, the most meaningful changes came on a personal level. He saw more smiles and nods from his peers, including those who had once laughed at him. Marcus and other black students began organizing events and discussions, creating a sense of community that hadn't existed before. One day, as Elijah walked through campus, he crossed paths with Jason. The once confident student looked sheepish, his gaze dropping as they passed. Elijah didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His success was his statement. As Elijah looked ahead, he realized this was just the beginning. His time on campus had taught him the power of standing up, speaking out, and staying true. And he knew his voice would continue to make waves far beyond the university walls. This was more than a story of triumph. It was a testament to resilience, courage, and the undeniable impact one person can make when they refuse to let the world silence them.